Literary fiction is, in my mind, kind of a murky phrase. It speaks to our need to categorize everything. Everything needs to be labeled and put in its place and given some kind of a genre or description. Genres are generally quite easy. Fantasy, science fiction, thrillers, romance, etc. And then you have books that generally get labelled commercial fiction. Stories that speak to our real-life experiences and are easy to read and enjoy. Then you have literary fiction, which is basically the same thing, but smarter. Literary fiction is commercial fiction, but for clever people. Although I guess there's more to it than that. Literary fiction can quite often cross over with different genres. I would argue especially thrillers and science fiction. Science fiction is so often about something. So here I'm going to talk about 10 of my favourite literary novels. Even though I just kind of made fun of the concept of literary novels, I love literary fiction. Most of what I read is literary in some way. Even when I'm reading a horror novel or a science fiction novel, I get irritated if it doesn't have decent themes that I can dig into and explore. So before I go over 10 of my favourites, I'm just going to try and describe what literary fiction actually is. From where I'm standing, literary fiction can be defined by two different aspects. One is themes. Literary novels are generally about something. Something social, something political, something related to religion or culture, something related to an issue or topic such as racism, feminism, xenophobia, queer culture, or it might thematically be a bit more philosophical about the ways that we spend our lives, the relationships that we have, and the ways that we interact with each other. A novel that is deeply and intensely about family dynamics and friendships. A book that makes you stop and think about your own life, your interactions, the way that you live. So a literary novel should be thematically dense, either in a political sense or in a more intimate and personal sense. The other thing that literary novels so often have is an experimental or unique approach to form. So literary novels are so often very carefully crafted and constructed, like a painting or a sculpture. Every word is very carefully chosen. It might all be expressed through a strange and experimental form, and I'm going to talk through a few of those. There are so many literary novels that are epistolary in their structure, so I think those are the big two takeaways. The way that a novel is expressed and told, and the themes at the heart of it. As I've said, literary novels can also be genre fiction. There are literary fantasy novels, literary thrillers, literary horror novels. But very, very often, maybe most of the time, literary novels are more commercial, more grounded, more set in the real world, set in the modern day. So let's go through some of my favourites. I should say here that I've just selected 10, and a lot of these are books I actually read fairly recently. So I'm skipping over so many legendary authors of literary fiction like Elena Ferrante, George Orwell, Franz Kafka, Britt Bennett, Emily St. John Mandel, Donna Tartt, Octavia Butler, Ray Bradbury, John Steinbeck. I could go on and on. There are a lot of great novelists that do incredible literary fiction, and I've skipped over a lot of them to talk about 10 that I love. So here they are. I'm going to start really, really strong with my favourite author of all time, Kazuo Ishiguro, and my favourite novel of his, arguably his best book, The Remains of the Day. Kazuo Ishiguro is a Japanese-born British novelist who is flawless, almost, in his execution of everything he does. The Remains of the Day is an historical novel set in the 1950s after World War II, and it centres around a man named Stevens. Stevens has been a butler at a big fancy British house for a long, long time, for his entire life. His father even worked there. And Stevens is now in his twilight years, and the house is owned by a nouveau riche American who has told Stevens to take a few days off. The house's new owner is going back to the States for business, and he says to Stevens, hey, I'm not going to be here, so go take a holiday, go somewhere, take the car, and drive somewhere. So he does. Stevens drives to Devon, I think, or Cornwall, and along the way we learn about him through flashbacks. through him just musing on his life, on his memories, on his opinions. He's heading there specifically to catch up with a woman who used to work at the house but moved on with her life. She was kind of a lost opportunity, a lost love, what could have been. But that's what the book is about. Stevens gave up on so much of his life because of his attitude towards tradition. Literary fiction is quite often about unlikable characters because it's about honesty, and Stevens isn't particularly likable. He is a very conservative man, very, very traditionalist, very set in his ways. He believes he knows the right way to live your life, the right way to be. Customs and traditions are what make life worth living and what make a country great and all of this shit. He doesn't like progress, he doesn't like change, and that has bitten him in the arse time and time again. This is a novel that is angry at tradition and conservatism. Stevens exemplifies those things, and life sucks for him in a lot of ways. He's missed out on so many things, and this is a journey through his life. It's beautiful. It is one of my favourite novels by my favourite author. If you've never read it, please do. Here's a book I read relatively recently, I'm a Fan by Sheena Patel. This is a debut novel. And wow, for a debut novel, this is absolutely incredible. It's a really short piece of literary fiction that tells the story of a brown British woman of Indian descent. She lives in London. She has a stable boyfriend, but we don't really learn anything about him or anything about her job. That's not really what this book is about. This is a book about obsession and about parasocial relationships. You see, our protagonist is obsessed with two people. One is a very successful man that she is secretly sleeping with on the side, and she actually wants to be with permanently. But he takes a lot of business trips, and periodically he heads over to California. And when he's there, he sleeps with someone else. This young, hot influencer girl with a YouTube channel who's just a nepo baby. And she's the other person that our protagonist is obsessed with. So she spends her time either sneaking off to sleep with this guy that she wishes she could be with permanently, or online stalking and building up a parasocial relationship with this hot influencer in California. This is a book about internet culture, about the unhealthy ways that we treat ourselves and each other, the ways that we become obsessed with people, the concept of celebrity. This is a cruel and obsessive protagonist, sleeping with a cruel and arrogant and dismissive man, and obsessing over a nepo baby who doesn't know she exists. There's a lot of toxicity in this book, but it's very, very honest. It's written in a very experimental way, massively lacking in any proper nouns. You've just got the man I want to be with and the woman I'm obsessed with, and those are their names. This is a book about so many toxic aspects of modern life, especially with regards to the internet and our parasocial relationships. It's absolutely fantastic. Honestly, when I think about literary fiction, there are three names that come to mind. One is the aforementioned Kazuo Ishiguro, two is Max Porter, who I will come to in a second, and three is Rachel Cusk. At the time of recording, this is the only Rachel Cusk novel I've read, and she is like the queen of literary fiction. Books that are written in a minimalistic, expressionistic way, where descriptions and dialogue and narrative all blur together with a lack of punctuation. Books that are about human relationships, about the flaws in ourselves and the way that we express ourselves and the way that we interact with other people. Second Place has all of that. Our protagonist is a woman who just goes by M. She lives in a marshy, isolated part of the English coastline. She's been a big fan of this pretty famous painter for a long time, a painter who just goes by L. And one day, M and her husband Tony have the opportunity to host L, to have him stay in their guest house, their Second Place. And while he's there, he's going to paint the coastline, paint the environment, paint the people. But he also brings with him a kind of piece of arm candy, a trophy girlfriend, a pretty young woman who stirs things up while she's there. This is a very subtly feminist novel about a woman's place in her own life. This is about M. Her obsession with the painter, her relationship to her husband, the way that she spends her life, and very cleverly, I guess, the title is about their second place and the fact that she kind of comes second place. Not just to the people in her life, but to the choices that she makes, the way that she puts herself second. This is a very subtly feminist novel, written in an experimental way that flows without break, and it digs so deep into relationship dynamics. It's a very quiet book, but a very, very beautiful one. It makes sense for a lot of war novels to be literary because war literature is so often about war in a political, social, philosophical sense. And Fingerbone is probably my favourite war novel. This is a Japanese novel by Hiroki Takahashi. It was translated by the legendary Takumi Nieda, and it's about a Japanese soldier in Papua New Guinea. It's a harrowing book, a painful thing to read, about the way that we just lose people. In war, people are just cannon fodder, and our nameless protagonist befriends people and loses them, either to their wounds or to malaria, which harkens back to the poetry of Wilfred Owen, who wrote about how so often soldiers in the World War I trenches just died of exposure, died of the weather, died of disease and infection. People become just meat that ends up rotting. It's really, really sad. This is another book with a nameless, faceless protagonist who thematically represents the soldier in war, the thing that means nothing, the person who goes out to fight for their country and is caught up in the noble pride of it all, but ultimately isn't cared about by their government, by the powers that be, by the people who are moving all the chess pieces around. It's really dark and bleak, but it really makes you think about war. I mentioned Max Porter before as one of the quintessential names of literary fiction, and this is Shy. Max Porter's written a slew of fantastic short novels. Grief is the Thing with Feathers, Lanny, The Death of Francis Bacon, and Shy. Shy is about a young boy called Shy. He's been living for a while at a boarding house type place for troubled young men. Teenagers who maybe have committed minor crimes and misdemeanors and antisocial behavior. And he's been there for a while and he's decided to leave. So the novel begins with him sneaking out in the middle of the night and walking down a very quiet, dark road in the English countryside. And we spend the entire novel in his head. He's walking down the street, and we just dig through his memories, his thoughts, his feelings, how he ended up there and why, who his family are, what's his relationship like with them, what friends he's had, what romantic and sexual relationships he's had. This is a book that, through very, very experimental language and expression, captures what it's like inside the human brain at any given time. The way that we think, the way that memories, thoughts, feelings, opinions all blur together. If you really stop and think for 5 minutes about how your brain works, if you just captured a 5-minute thinking session, what would that 5 minutes look like? It would be a cocktail of random memories that pop into your head, a to-do list, things you've got to do that day, opinions about something that annoyed you, happy feelings, sad feelings, things you miss, things you're excited about. It would just be a melting pot of strange thoughts, feelings, memories, opinions, blah, blah, blah. That's what this book is. It's just this boy's life, his memories, his feelings. It's absolutely brilliant. This is an experimental book that explores how it feels to be in someone's head. And it just so happens to be the head of a troubled teenage boy. And it's a book that thematically also reminds you that we are all complex creatures. Breasts and Eggs by Miyako Kawakami is one of my favourite novels of all time. Translated into English by Sam Bett and David Boyd, this is an absolute masterpiece of Japanese fiction. It was originally one short novel and then a much longer sequel, and here we have both of those books smushed together in kind of a part 1, part 2 situation. Part 1 tells the story of a woman who lives in Tokyo. She's pretty shy and meek and quiet, and she wants to be a novelist. Her sister is visiting her from Osaka and has brought along her daughter. All three of these women have different attitudes towards their bodies, towards a woman's place in the world, towards what it means to be a woman. And in part 2, our protagonist wants to be a mother, but she doesn't want a partner. She enjoys being single, she enjoys being in control of her own life, but she wants to be a mum, she wants to raise a kid, and it's about how she manages to do that. This is a masterpiece of feminist literature that explores womanhood and what that means exactly. I love this book. Both halves are very, very different tonally and thematically, and the only thing they really share is a protagonist. This is a book about societal expectations, about patriarchy, about what women think that we should do with our lives and how womanhood works, and what patriarchy and misogyny and conservative narratives have told us is the purpose of the woman and how women should look and present themselves and live their lives and look and feel and everything else, and it tears all of that down in really, really clever ways. Another modern Japanese novel that is another favorite of mine, Convenience Store Woman by Sayaka Murata. This book was translated into English by Jini Takemori, and it's probably in my top 5 favorite novels of all time. This is a wonderful literary novel about what it means to be happy and content with your life. Our protagonist has worked at the same convenience store for 18 years, and she's perfectly content. She's very autistic coded, and she gets confused and frustrated by the rules of life, especially the rules of adulthood. That ladder we're all supposed to climb, where you get a job, and then you take work more seriously and you get a career and you advance in that career, whatever it may be. And you go up and up and up and you get more and more money and more responsibilities. And socially, you're supposed to find someone and get engaged and get married and buy a house and have a family. There is a professional ladder that we climb and a social ladder that we climb. And we're supposed to be constantly making progress. And our protagonist doesn't want any of that. She's perfectly content with her life, being a cog in a particular machine that she understands, she sympathizes with, she can conceptually follow. What's wrong with that? According to the people around her, everything is wrong with that. This is about a neurodivergent woman who has found a way to be happy and live and stay alive and be content, and that seems to piss people off. I love this book so much. Next, I have 3 books that I read really recently, and the first is this, Mrs. S by Kay Patrick. This is a sapphic novel about an Australian woman who moves to the UK, and she is struggling with her gender identity, starting to present in a more gender-neutral way, and even a more expressly masculine way, while also developing a crush on the wife of her boss. She's working at this old-fashioned girls' boarding school in England, and she develops an obsession with Mrs. S, the wife of the headmaster. This is a very literary novel in its form and its structure. There are no proper nouns here. The closest one we have is Mrs. S. The girls at the boarding school are all one homogeneous clump called the girls with a capital G. They are all one thing, one mass to her, which expresses her lack of interest in them and the fact that she can't tell them apart because that's not what she cares about. What she cares about is Mrs. S. That's what she cares about. That's who she cares about. And that's why Mrs. S almost has a name. This is a book about gender identity from a fantastic non-binary writer. It's a debut which staggers me. And it's a book about sapphic love, obsession, sex, fantasies. It's electric. Then we have another debut that I really adored, Bellies by Nicola Dinnan. Dinnan was born in Hong Kong, raised in Malaysia, and now lives in London. And one of her 2 protagonists also reflects that life. This is a novel that begins pretty simply at university, and you have 2 boys. They're both gay, one of them has only recently come out, and they fall in love in their second year of university. And they spend the subsequent 2 years enjoying each other's company, having sex, building a group of friends, wondering about what their life might lead to after university. But when they finish uni, Ming realizes that she is in fact a transgender woman, and this is about what that means for their relationship. The novel is told from both of their perspectives, and we go back and forth between them. They're both written in the first person. Tom is a gay man who now has to figure out how he can have a relationship with a trans woman, if that's possible, if that's fair on either of them. And Ming is dealing with her transition, trying to be happy in her own skin, and also wanting to love Tom however way that's possible to do. It's a novel that really racks you. It tears at your heart in a lot of ways. It's a novel about love, but it's not really a love story. That's what makes it literary. It's not a straight-up romance by any means. It's a novel about love, about what love means, about what friendship means, about what our bodies mean, about what defines gender, sexual orientation, sexuality, friendship, so many different things, the ways in which we love each other, and love is such a complex thing. And in Bellies, Nicola Dinnan is trying to approach love from all angles, all aspects, every cog in the love machine. It's a very ambitious thing, and I think she does it beautifully. It's a novel by a trans woman about the trans experience, but it also factors in what that's like for the cis people that love us. And I appreciate that. Finally, we have Chain Gang All-Stars by Nana Kwame Adjei-Brenyah. This is an amazing novel. This stands alongside the works of Margaret Atwood, George Orwell, and Ray Bradbury as an incredible piece of dystopian literary fiction. Chain Gang All-Stars is about the American prison system. In this world, the American prison system has created this gladiator arena where prisoners can opt in to fight in gladiator battles, fight to the death in a blood sport. For 3 years, they battle it out with each other in one-on-one duels with weapons, and if they can survive and rise through the ranks, they get their freedom. But at what cost? This is a novel that explores the capitalistic system that is the American prison system, the racism at the heart of it, as well as the homophobia and transphobia, and it's a novel full of footnotes. Footnotes that are statistics and facts and numbers and details and names that exposes the racism, the abuse, and the fact that it is a capitalistic industry. It is a for-profit part of the capitalist machine, and it destroys the lives of minority people far more than cishet white people. This is a book about race, it's a book about injustice, it's a book about police brutality, it's about a lot of different things, but it's also a very engaging gladiator story. Chain Gang All-Stars is a masterpiece of literary dystopian fiction about the corruption at the heart of the American capitalistic prison system. Amazing. There you go. Those were just 10 literary novels that I absolutely love. If you enjoyed this, you can always support me on Patreon. I am very, very active with my patrons. There is a Discord community that you can join. I constantly post what I'm up to and previews of videos and articles that I'm working on. If you want to be more involved in the Books and Bow community and meet other amazing bookworms and even join a book club that I host, support me on Patreon and subscribe for books.